Welcome to Savage Minds. This week's guest is Kellie-Jay Keen, a women's rights campaigner. She is also known by the name Posey Parker. Kellie-Jay started standing for women in 2018 and has adorned walls with billboards and stickers with the dictionary definition of the word woman. She has also publicly declared her support for J.K. Rowling and has dressed women with iconic t-shirts, including Mary Wollstonecraft. Kellie-Jay is a controversial figure and says of herself, quote, "I am unwilling to compromise women's rights on any level. The blood, sweat, and tears of women that came before us are not mine to disregard," end quote. Welcome to our podcast, Kellie-Jay.
Thanks, Julian.
I would like to know a bit about what you've been involved in these recent weeks. Being someone who listens to your podcast when I can, because of a quasi-lockdown situation where I'm living, I'm very impressed with a lot of the work that you've done and the breadth of it, from not just your billboards, but the way your billboards has also had a contagion in the United States. Could you speak to some of these actions?
Well, the billboards are an interesting thing. I think they're now accused of being a dog whistle. So now the dictionary definition of woman, obviously, because everything that we do is in response to men, and it's nothing to do with women all on our own. But they're now called a transphobic dog whistle. So I think that's quite interesting, if not quite amusing, if it wasn't so sinister. And it has been picked up. The I Heart J.K. Rowling billboard that we put up in Waverley Station in Edinburgh, that was as a response to trans activists who poured red blood into the handprints of J.K. Rowling. And they did that to sort of say she had blood on her hands for daring to speak up for the rights of women, because obviously that means that there will be a mass suicide by people that call themselves trans. And right. So just as a support and response to encourage J.K. Rowling to stand firm and know that there were so many women that were just so grateful for her speaking up at all, that we've just wanted to do something to show her support. And because it is an expression of love with a big red heart right in the centre of the poster, it then can't be so easily characterised as a transphobic dog whistle, although they have tried. But it is, there's queries in Australia, New Zealand and Ireland about also putting it up and also putting a dictionary definition of woman. So there are other groups throughout the globe that are doing it. And in Canada, they've already done it. And then throughout America, including the Washington, what do they call their tube? Sort of underground stations.
And the result has been quite positive, actually, because your message, I remember when you started doing these billboards, it was quite ingenious, because obviously the accusation that this is called a dog whistle is actually proof of what you're saying, that a dictionary definition of woman is cause for people to be upset.
Yeah. Well, we tried to get something really bland. So, you wanted something, when we first did it, it was all about it being the most neutral, woman-centered thing. And the thought process was, what was ultimately at stake by trans activism? What was really happening to the way that we were talking? And it was that we could no longer talk about women. So we had words like menstruators, cervix havers, birthing people, chest feeders, those sorts of things. That was used in replace of the word woman. So it was just obvious that the erasure of women, the first massive assault is going to, or the final frontier really, I guess, is going to be language.
And why do you think that people to the left of centre have embraced this kind of identity politics where language, not money, not any kind of material currency, but language is what is up for grabs?
Well, I mean, I'm not a great political analyzer, but I've been, or analyst rather, I've been looking at this, and my gut response is that now that I've awoken and have moved away from the left, I often think, was it always like this and I just had no idea? And or is this brand new? And I think it's a little combination of both. I think it's worse than it's ever been, but I think ultimately people have always taken language to stop people being able to speak. If you look at somewhere like Afghanistan, women don't even have names, even in death. So they're buried with a sort of unmarked graves, and they're referred to by their male relatives. And so why the left has done this, I think it's a combination of wanting to be nice, not really thinking about things that you're told to think. So assuming that there is this moral superiority that exists in the left, that means if the left tells you something is right, then it automatically is. And the lack of critical analysis on anything. Everything is so surface that nobody ever looks beyond what they're being told. Nobody thinks about the reasons behind it or what the ultimate consequences are of their new thinking or their evolved thinking.
Yes, certainly, we've seen this within the debates over what transgender activists will call trans rights and what feminists are calling the erasure of not only women as a definition, but clearly they're using the linguistic warfare, the assault on language, in order to shore up gains on the actual material front. The other side to the language war is that they are trying to make physical space advances. I mean, if we look at this as a battlefield, it's about gaining access to dressing rooms, changing rooms, segregated by sex spaces that are segregated because they're important to be segregated, because sexual assault and rape is not a fiction. These are realities. And you're pointing to the definition of woman on billboards, on t-shirts, and this being called offensive as a call to murder or to provoke trans suicides. And now, as you point out, being a dog whistle, this seems to indicate that something's really gone amiss on the left. While the left historically has been entrenched in material analysis, meaning the left was the space where you would go to see what homelessness wasn't just a word. Homelessness literally meant someone who physically did not have a place to sleep. We're seeing this kind of odd reversal on identity politics. I've just written about this, where the ACLU was historically the group that had the Democratic Party's back in terms of free speech, because the Democratic Party in the United States was the party that was pro-free speech. In recent years, the ACLU did a 180 on free speech, and they suddenly decided that some free speech, remember, the ACLU went to bat for the Ku Klux Klan in court battles, a famous court battle 40 years ago, and they decided that some free speech is actually not good, that it can be harmful. So the very leftist traditions that once upon a time fought for our right to express and to say things and to analyze poverty is real, pointing to the absence of a house, pointing to the absence of money in the bank. Now, it seems that we are living in this very surreal moment of the left and the right shifting poles. I'm seeing much more concern from the right about women's sex-based protections, about their right to say no to men. I mean, this is the right wing going to bat for our rights. And many women on the left, I'm sure you've had dealings with them as well, are the ones that are calling us haters for saying that woman is an adult human female. How do we get out of this?
It's just, I don't know, because those same women, so the people that recognize the harms of trans activist demands and the way that we talk about women and trans activism and the different censorship, they can see it there, but they really don't see it in themselves, which I find quite extraordinary. Because, you know, the first thing that happened to me when all of this stuff happened, when I realised what was at stake, which was as late as 2015, I then questioned everything. You know, it wasn't all of my previously held beliefs were up for grabs. It was like, well, why do I think this? Is there a reason for me to think this? Have I just been told to think this? And I know that men on the left like to call this red pill or whatever it is. But I think it is conversely to woke, it is actually like an awakening when you realize that all of these things that you're holding on to are perhaps not really true.
Certainly, we're seeing that a lot of women are waking up from this. Myself, I was one. I did queer theory. I used to call some of these men she out of friendship. I knew some of them, and I thought, oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings. Many of the feminists would say this is our conditioning as females, that we're made to be more polite. True. But now that we're all talking about this more and more, the media is covering these stories. I have a Google alert. So every day at 10 o'clock, I get an email from Google giving me all the media stories that day for transgender. There's an enormous amount of transgender stories, I dare say, far more than covering homelessness in Britain, people who are barely able to survive during post-lockdown and now new lockdown Britain.
Yeah.
Right? And
it's an easy fight, right? It's a surface easy fight. It's an Instagram meme, the whole transgender story. It's nobody's going to solve the world hunger. And even climate change is sort of reported in the same way. It's all surface level. You are really in control of your life, kids, as opposed to real things that actually have an impact on your life.
Absolutely. And the media is feeding into this. The way it covered protesters in the States as who were pro-Trump as opposed to those protesting the police. Two different media representations entirely. We saw the same thing with Distinction Rebellion coverage in the UK as opposed to those who were out on the street breaking lockdown, right? And we're still given these diametrically opposed media representations.
So I mean, I watched the, so I have a friend who, someone I don't know that well, lives in California, but British born. And she talked about the BLM protest. She's a white woman. She talked about the BLM protest. She talked about the smashing up and how they were peaceful protests, and it was really understandable. And she sort of thinks that Antifa is a genuine organization that's anti-fascist. And so she sort of talked about this stuff and how it was so brilliant to see all these young people rising up against authority. But then she talked about how in her state they were boarding up shops in preparation for Trump fans or voters losing their minds when he loses. Now, there's been no such riot. I'm not saying that there won't be, should there be a recount and he is elected or not elected or whatever happens. Maybe there will be some sort of starting point for something more dramatic. But when you sort of phrased it with her and said, well, you called the BLM protests peaceful, you also talk about how stupid Trump supporters are for not supporting the lockdown and not wearing masks, and yet you're celebrating Biden's victory with all these people congregating in the streets. Like, is it genuinely that you don't see your hypocrisy or don't understand that you're saying all these mixed things based on who you're talking about? Or is this willful, or is this just stupidity? I mean, I haven't actually asked her outright because clearly I'm banned from all social media at the moment. But it's, you just wonder, where do people's heads go? Like, where is the point in their brains that allows them to do such ghastly and overt hypocrisy? Just so terrible.
Well, this is where party politics is a true part of the problem. I'm beginning to believe that maybe We need to do politics in an entirely different way. This was suggested by people like, Brett Weinstein and others who are offering possibilities to the typical platforms that are rinse and repeat and seem to get us nowhere. And the fact you've just mentioned that you are banned from Facebook, how many more days do you have to wait to get back on?
Well, it was 30 days. I think it might be about another 10 or 11. And that was for calling. There was, a long story short, there was a woman who owns a vegan cafe in Brighton, and she had refused to put up, I think she donates her profit. So she's non-profit, and she donates, or not for profit rather, she donates the profits to help give children who don't have enough money in their families to eat better. So she's, it's a pretty moral little thing. And she had refused to put up a fundraiser for somebody to have their breasts amputated, or as euphemistically called, top surgery. And because she'd done that, she'd been targeted by trans activists. So I had gone on the page set up to ruin this woman's business and called somebody a man, literally just a man, and also said that somebody was a middle-class, spoiled little rich boy, and I was banned for 30 days.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what was worse, calling the person middle class or a boy? Because what's interesting in what's going on is that big tech, we saw this again with the Hunter Biden case, but it was not the first time. I've been writing for years about the dangers between big tech, which is, Twitter, Facebook, Google, beyond, Instagram, and they're owned by each other too, and freedom of speech, which you very well know about, and then the links between the Department of Defense and these organizations. I wrote in 2018 various articles for Forbes and Counterpunch about how Google is the company that supplied Dragonfly, basically Department of Defense drone system. And it was only because of an internal memo that was leaked, and Google workers came out in droves, protested, massive letter. It was all over the news. Google promised to put it away. The next year, when the contract came up, Google honored its word to its workers, and Palantir took over. Now, all of this is geeky, googly gop for many people, but what's important is see the news that's coming out this week. See my piece later today. I'm going to put it up. Biden's transition team is chock full of people from these companies. And it's extremely dangerous what's happening, because we're seeing... I
think I read your update today.
Oh, did you? Okay, because it's just like, it's insane. There's a whole crossover between the military-industrial complex, big tech, and free speech. And people need to be very alarmed by this. All these Democrats wiping their brow saying, oh, crazy Trump's out of office. I've been, go to my Facebook wall. It's a battlefield. Even from dear friends of mine, one who asked me, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm more than okay. I think it's all dangerous. I think we at least with Trump, we had division. So warfare wasn't really quickly happening under his administration. In fact, he didn't create new theaters of war, as had Obama and W. Bush and Clinton, and we can go back. In fact, Trump is the first leader in my lifetime, president of the United States in my lifetime, to not have started a new theater of war, right? So these are very important facts that people choose to forget. Not, I'm going to get now email saying, you're supporting Trump. No, I'm stating a fact. And here we are once again. It's like trans women are women nonsense all over again. We need to be able to speak clearly about facts. We had two horrible candidates to choose from. And people made the choice they wanted to. Meanwhile, we've got people like Robert Reich suggesting blacklists of people who supported Trump to be published. Other organizations have actually started an online agenda to list everyone, funders to voters, Another group, a geographical map, so you can see which neighbors voted for Trump. I kid you not. This is frightening. And so you're being
insane.
kicked off of Facebook is crazy, but this is all part of the process. Who is not going to hear your voice? How long before someone else's voice is removed? Many people, as you know, have chosen not to put their information on Medium or on YouTube, etc., because they're all worried about being demonetized or being kicked off. And yet Greenwald, one of the founders of the Intercept, could not get an article through. This is all very worrying. Hence, you're seeing a lot of journalists doing what I've done, which is to start a new space on Substack and try and do it on their own or to do it in small collectives. Big tech is where all the information is being funneled through, private information, biometric information when you count your photo. And this is why the Google workers in 2018 protested their own company. And now what's happening is where they were successful in getting Google to stop. Guess what's happened? All of these Google workers and from other companies are now being able to join think tanks, be part of Biden's transition team, and be considered to members of his cabinet and other high roles within the White House. Our free speech is up for grabs, not just in the UK or in France or in the US, but globally speaking. So how do we come to access what is the data public sphere or the public square that is more and more uniquely happening online as people have less and less time to go outside, and with lockdowns legally can't go outside. And yet your voice, your posters and the contagion from your work has had a knock-on effect. So this means that people are using social media in a very good way too.
I think, well, what's Standing for Women, what we've decided to do is actually go out in the public square. So clearly I was arrested a few weeks ago, and they've declined to actually send any further paperwork about that. So, and other people have had their fines cancelled. So to put people in the picture, I basically did an event up in Leeds, which is West Yorkshire in the UK. And West Yorkshire police are quite renowned for ignoring grooming gangs. There's a managed, there's basically a prostitution area where there's very damaged, exploited women selling their bodies and in a prostitution sort of area where the police are ignoring it. And so Leeds in particular and West Yorkshire police, they have a terrible track record with women and misogyny. And so we decided to do an event up there, and it's called Reclaiming the Public Square, One Corner at a Time, which refers to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London. And so the idea is that you go out and you speak the words that the social media giants are telling you that you can't say, that the police are beginning to tell you that you're not allowed to utter or type online. And so it's all about reclaiming the actual public square. And there's something really empowering about being actually outside in front of people and speaking. Now, unfortunately for me, the police decided, people that were there, but they decided that I'd broken COVID lockdown restrictions, which wasn't true. And the fact that they haven't really pursued me further proves the point that they now know it wasn't true, and it was a terrible thing to do to stop women talking in public. But that's something that Standing for Women feel really strongly about, because free speech, I mean, there are plenty of women on the left and feminists who don't agree with free speech at all. They do see that speech can be harmful, and harm is violence and all this stuff. And I just think fundamentally free speech is the most important for the most disenfranchised members of society, because if you can't talk about your oppression or your circumstances, then you can't begin to resolve them. And so I don't know if I'm a free speech absolutist, because it hasn't really been tested. I tested myself to the full breadth of what that might mean, but I would like to think I was a free speech absolutist.
Well, for about Americans and others listening to this, can you explain the significance of Speaker's Corner? Because many people are not aware what it means in the discourse of, let's say, Hyde Park in London.
Well, it's where the suffragettes had their big rallies. Venice Allen, part of Standing for Women, she's much more clued up on Speaker's Corner. But essentially, what it is in modern Britain is it's a place where you can go, take a soapbox. You're not allowed to any amplification, so it's just your voice. And what Standing for Women does is we go and stand on a ladder with a poster behind us, and we talk about women's rights. Now, unfortunately, what Speaker's Corner is in 2020 is a lot of men arguing about Islam. So that might be different factions of Islam. You occasionally get Jews, or you'll get evangelical Christians. And it seems to be quite a nicely tempered place. But there are some Christians from some of the more Muslim countries. So there's some Turkish Christians that go. They, especially the women, they are often bullied and intimidated by some of the Muslim men. There was one, a lady called, I want to call her Hayton, spelled Hatun. She was there a couple of weeks ago with a picture of the Prophet Muhammad, and she was basically punched unconscious by a man. So there is a little bit of weirdness going on there, where sometimes the police turn a blind eye to some of the rules of the park, which are things like no religious worship. So you're not allowed to congregate on prayer mats and pray. But Islam, so Muslims do seem to get away with contravening some of these laws in a way that other people don't. But goodness knows why that is. But yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's your place to go and talk to people. For example, There's a man there who talks about not having children and how actually populating the world is a terrible thing to do and it will bring on the destruction of the world. And so he was talking there a few weeks ago, and he's got everyone, he's a great speaker. He's quite funny, and he's a great speaker. And he's telling these, and it's predominantly young men around him, like wide-eyed, listening, thinking, "Yeah, I agree." And I just went up and I just said to stood in front of him, and I said, "You do realise this man's got four children?" So, the guy that tells everyone not to have kids has got 4 children himself. It's so good. But when we got attacked we got really intimidated by a Black Lives Matter march that was sort of, I don't know why they came through Hyde Park, because that wasn't the planned route for them, but that's where we were. And they walked past us, and then they saw one of the leaders, or the sort of front, the leaders of the march. One of them saw me on a megaphone, and then they started shouting about trans lives. So we sort of responded and talked about women, adult, human, female. And they sort of pushed some of us and intimidated us and shouted at us. And the men at Speaker's Corner all came to sort of make sure we were all right and assist. So that was pretty nice.
Yeah, I saw the video of your being arrested and such. Excellent on you for recording it. So your charges have not been dropped while others have had their charges dropped?
Well, what they did is they arrested me because I wouldn't give them my details. That was the plan really for me, that I'd rather be arrested and then actually speak in court and say some of the things that women are too frightened to say. For example, I would say that trans women are men in a court of law. I would use the correct pronouns for somebody. And I want the opportunity to say that in court. And so that's why I did that. And they basically said that what they would do is they would contact me via letter with a summons to attend court. And I've not received any such thing. And other people who received fixed penalty notices under the COVID load of nonsensical laws, many of them have had their FPNs just dropped.
And I presume you have taken down the data about the fact that environmental protests were not received in a similar way to yours.
Absolutely. Well, we had, it's really interesting because when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening in the United Kingdom, in places like Bristol, uh, we were still in lockdown. Nobody got arrested for that. And also there were no corona spikes. So it wasn't like Bristol, after having these thousands of people all mixing in close proximity, it wasn't like they then had this massive COVID-19 spike with many deaths and infection rates going up. They just didn't have that. But at the same time, we were being told that it was still really contagious and you shouldn't go out and you shouldn't meet and you shouldn't see families, and the elderly people in care homes not allowed to be visited, and all these terrible things. I had friends of relatives who died alone, and funerals where you weren't allowed to hug your mother when your father just died. And at the same time, we had this COVID-19, this Black Lives Matter, which should have been super spreaders, surely. None of that materialized. So there's so many themes of dishonest or things that don't make sense. It's very difficult to pin your hat on one conspiracy theory, because so many of them seem to be like, if COVID-19 is really contagious, as contagious as they say, which I've no doubt that it is, I have no idea. But if it is, then Black Lives Matter protests throughout the United Kingdom and America should have produced massive spikes. Also, if you're not allowed to mix and COVID-19 restrictions are true and enforceable, then loads of people should also have been arrested. Like, whether or not the COVID-19 is as contagious as they said in the first place, they still made no arrests, and apparently it was totally fine to have those protests.
Certainly, there's been a lot of people who have been unaccountable for having protests when others had protests and were given summons or arrested, and on both sides of the Atlantic, by the way. And this is part of the critique, the larger critique that's gone on around free speech, because this does come down to who is free to protest and who is free to be surveyed by CNN for, not maintaining social distance.
Oh, no. So a woman called Claire up in Leeds had many conversations, quite fraught, I think, with an officer, I want to call Kieran. And I spoke with him and he was just so cross. He was like, you can't have this protest. And I said, well, you're saying that women aren't allowed to meet. And I consider that a politically motivated maneuver by the police. And if you turn up tomorrow and you arrest women who are simply meeting to talk about women's rights, then I think you are getting it wrong, but also infringing my human rights. And he was just having none of it. And he said, so when we arrived, there were like 2 police vans either side for 16, I think there were 16 women. Maybe more would have gathered, but it's not necessarily about having a huge crowd of people. It's about just being able to say these things out loud. But yeah, he was very cross, really. Just,
had you seen any of these officers before with your previous interactions with the West Yorkshire Police? Okay. But you were maintaining social distance. Well,
not that I recognise, no.
You were maintaining social distance, though, as I recall.
We didn't. Yeah, well, I'm a bit funny about all of this. I feel uncomfortable with the whole social distancing and everything. But we'd done a risk assessment. I'd gone through a COVID risk assessment based on religious worship. So I used that as a template, and I'd gone through it all, and we had hand sanitizer, we had spare masks, we had chalk so that we could put marks on the floor for people to stand. We had all of that. The event hadn't even started when they swooped in and started getting really cross with us and wanting to, they handcuffed a woman. They handcuffed somebody and took her to a police van, which is way beyond anything necessary.
The woman wearing the Thought Police t-shirt?
No, she wasn't the first arrested. So the first person arrested was, I'm actually speaking on my YouTube, so this whole live stream about it. And there's a lady called Sophie, and she was just arrested almost straight away. And they took her to a van in handcuffs, which is, I mean, they shouldn't have even touched us, really. There was no need. Nobody was going to resist arrest. So they didn't need to touch us. And they did. I was he grabbed the scruff of my jacket to walk me off, and I was quite happy to walk. I was happy to go and sit in a police van and continue to record, because they had no idea how to switch off my phone. I didn't know I was still recording until I thought they'd switched my phone off, until my husband phoned me, and fortunately I could see that via my Apple Watch. So it was I could see that it was him, and I just had to answer and go, arrested. Just then put the phone down.
Well, the will to shut down this kind of discussion about women's-based rights is not new. You mentioned the suffragettes earlier, but you also mentioned the fact that some feminists do believe that some speech should not be allowed. Now, I know we've known each other from Facebook groups for several years now, and I know that you've gone from calling yourself a feminist to not calling yourself a feminist because of some of the divisions that exist, not only around free speech, but that exist around some of the monolithic constructions that certain women in the feminist movement have constructed. Who's authorized to speak, who deserves to speak, and then their own PC politics, which I've characterized this as an elite feminism, because many of the women making these decisions about who's good and bad as a feminist, who's worthy of being called a feminist or a radical feminist even, are often the very movers and shakers who are privileged enough to have the microphone handed to them regularly by Newsnight, by Good Morning Britain, etc., Radio 4. And these are often women, even journalists, who have taken aim at you specifically. And I would, be interested to hear your
Who knew I was that important?
Well, you became, from 2018 especially, quite a paradoxical figure to some of these women. You were accused of being a racist. You were accused of admiring, even having a moniker of Tommy Robinson, which I'm still waiting to see produced. That's never been produced. And to being a racist, like literally to hating Muslim women, to hating Muslim men, to hating Muslims. And I can think of very few things you haven't been called by some of these women who characterize themselves as feminists.
I know. Well, the first thing I've got to say is that there's this idea amongst these feminists that ultimately the best thing about them is being on the left. And they're on the left because they are champions of working class women. The ultimate in activist wear is this idea that they care so much about working class women, and anybody who doesn't vote for the left doesn't care about the poorest and most vulnerable working class women. Well, the truth of it is, in the United Kingdom, 42% of those poor, stupid working class women vote Conservative. But this idea of rescuing these poor, stupid working class women who don't know what's good for them, I think they have to stop doing that, because they are not the arbiters of all that's moral at all. And often they're quite bullish and not very nice people. So that's one thing that I just want to get out of the way, because I'm sick and tired of reading that if you're not a Labour supporter, then you want more people to be homeless. That just isn't true. I mean, I've voted Labour nearly my whole life, so it doesn't work for me. I certainly don't want to be on the side of people that want to mutilate children's bodies, want to rent women's bodies for sex, and want to obliterate women's rights. So this idea that these women on the left, so the large socialist feminist organisation, Women's Place UK, which platformed up until maybe 6 months ago, the person they'd most platformed besides one of their own was a man called Christina Harrison. who played on a women's football team, used women's changing rooms, called himself a lesbian, the absolute thing that we are all fighting against, they repeatedly platformed. And at the same time, they took aim at me. And lots of people have used words like envy or jealous, and I really don't think it's that. I think it's about power. I think it's hierarchies that they will probably refuse to acknowledge, but they all participate in. You have Helen Lewis at the top of the game because she is seen as a respectable journalist. For me, Helen Lewis seems to straddle the fence a little bit when it comes to some of these fights and the language that she's prepared to use. And then you've maybe got on the next rung, you might have Julie Bindel, then you might have Kathleen Stock, although I think Kathleen Stock has broken away from that recently with some of her comments about how the left and the right isn't working very well. Then you've got some of the academics who are only known in the very small circle of feminism. And then you've got everybody else vying for the attention underneath. And I just think they replicate a hierarchy. That's just it. And I don't fit, and I won't fit, and I refuse to fit, and I'm not invited, and neither do I want to participate in whatever it is that they're doing, because they seem to be protectionists about protecting men and women on the left. And ultimately, men on the left is what their game seems to be. Ultimately, the beneficiaries of their gatekeeping are men on the left. I don't care. I don't really care about any of their other politics. The only thing that matters to me is that somebody is female, firstly, they are my first concern, and children and men, and it's people that don't know what's going on, and by virtue of not knowing, are inadvertently consenting to this mass gaslighting of our society. And so I don't care how I do it. I don't care who the people are who receive this message, but I want everybody to know what's going on, because I think most right-minded people would be absolutely outraged if they knew that their elderly mother can no longer go to a single-sex ward in a hospital and definitely not share a ward with a man, or that their daughter can't go on a residential trip with school and not have a boy in her bedroom. I think that most people would be absolutely outraged and would say no.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider donating to Savage Minds. We depend on readers and listeners just like you for our support. Now back to our podcast. We see that many of these women who have, how to put it nicely, defamed you, have made a career out of being divisive amongst themselves as well. I've noticed that there have been many fallouts, to include myself. I was one of your defenders early on, simply because we've never met in real life. We barely know each other, but I saw what you wrote. I read it too, and I said, look, if you Google my name and add Islamophobia to that Google search, you will find dozens of academic papers on the subject. I know what Islamophobia is, and what she is saying is simply not it. In fact, when we talk about Islamophobia, I mean, as a scholar, you have to qualify that. Saying that you disagree with women's oppression in religion could be also viewed thusly as Buddhist-phobic or Christianophobic, because women in religion have always gotten the short end of the stick. There is no religion that I know of that allows women to have either equal or more power than men in any way, symbolically, structurally. And I was a bit alarmed that during lockdown here, I was the butt of an attack. I had no idea, because I don't use Twitter with any regularity. I got these emails saying, oh, are you aware that these women are trashing you? And here I was with two kids, very sick, not with COVID, but I was really floored by what was happening, because they did what one journalist referred to as bitch and block. So they complain about me and block me. Well, to be fair, they had already blocked me last year when I first defended you and Julia Long after you returned from DC, because they, again, these same women tried to make you and Julia Long out as a problem to the women's movement. Now, skip to last week, and who was elected as senator from Maryland?
That poor woman. That poor, powerless woman, Sarah McBride.
Yep. And this is Sarah McBride, who ran the HRC's press office, where I could not get an answer from the press office until he was out of office, until he was actually running for senator. Finally, I got an answer from the press office. Can you believe it? Over 2 years trying. Now, I take real issue with people calling you and Julia hateful, you a bigot, etc., all because
possibly illegal and criminal behavior, asking a man some questions.
Yes. I mean, this is insane. And I wrote back, that was Kathleen Stock that said that to you. I wrote her back on Twitter. I was very polite. I said, well, you have a little conception of what protest looks like in the United States. Protest is just that. In fact, you did nothing illegal, not by US law, not by any law that would recognize civil or political protest. And yet both of you were mired in controversy on the Twitter sphere. I had a personal discussion with another philosopher who basically thought that she and her gang were running the show. And since then, I've got nothing but flack from all of them. I was kicked off the Slack group that Kathleen Stock had invited me to. So my voice only mattered in as much as I would get on the slam dunk Posey Parker, bandwagon. And the minute I said, no, this isn't really fair and it's not right, I don't agree with anyone's politics, to include my own. My politics have changed from that discussion we had years ago in that group that cannot be named on Facebook, where you were raising issues about Islam. And my first impression was, hey, that sounds a little not right. And I would say my piece and you'd say your piece. But I learned a lot from that interaction with you, because what you underscored about the police in the UK and England specifically looking the other way over grooming gangs was not only spot on, but the very women in that group who were calling you a bigot went on to pen a piece just this past spring that took your words and plagiarized them as their own, saying that we need to also consider that maybe by looking the other way about grooming gangs, we're caving into this perception of racism and thusly creating a new kind of racism. Like, she was basically saying what you said. And then the other irony is people like Bindel calling you a right-winger while making her bread and butter from the right-wing media, which is, of course, her right. Who's going to pay a woman to write about trans politics? It's not going to be The Guardian. It's not, unless they're saying TWAW.
Well, the funny thing about the whole Islamophobia charge is that's come from probably discussions I had on Mumsnet about the difficulty of being shackled by garments that are about shaming women, and then calling yourself a feminist. And I probably was very clumsy with my words. However, most of the evidence is 6 tweets from the 80,000 tweets I'd made on Twitter before I was kicked off. And I've made loads of comments about lots of different religions. It won't just be Islam. I was a huge critic of the Catholic Church, particularly with the Pope before last. And so this idea that Islam is the only religion I've ever criticized is absolutely bonkers and just not true. As for individual women, there's something to be said for making somebody the monster, because then you can divert attention away from yourself. I don't really want to talk about the character of some of the women that you've mentioned, but to say that I think if I used words like fraud and it's only a matter of time, and then we'll just leave the listener to think about who I might be talking about, because I do think there's some very questionable claims being made by all sorts of women in this fight. I mean, I have a little bit of abuse from men, nothing like I've had for women in this fight. The worst things that have been said about me, to me, and the most vitriolic behavior and pile-ons have been from women on our side. And I think right, say that I am everything I'm accused of, or even if they believe it, if I knew somebody was making really massive steps forward in a fight that I was also in, I may not try and massively publicly shame them. So for example, one of the women who will remain nameless, I know a fair few things about which I think are entirely questionable, that don't necessarily have any impact on her views about this thing, about this fight. And so therefore, I don't need to go public about it. I mean, often the things that she does that make herself look terrible are very public anyway. But I don't need to further criticize that. Even the woman who defamed me and lied about me so terribly and totally wrecked a massive action and is sort of a crazy pathological liar, that person also does some really good work in other aspects of the feminist struggle. And so I also don't need to publicly attack her at every opportunity. I just occasionally respond. But I think that there's a bigger war that we all should be fighting, and I don't really have any time or energy for women who want to repeatedly tear me down. For a start, Julian, it's been happening to me since I was about 8. So it's, it's nothing significant.
It's interesting to me how many of these women, though, claim to be on the left. One of them, in fact, when I interviewed for a piece I was writing a few years ago, said, "Oh, you're writing this for Quillette? Well, Quillette is very right-wing." And I said, who? It's actually not right-wing. It's one of the few publications that's running pieces to the left and the right of center. It's doing what publications ought to be doing more of. Anyways, I was really shocked because of this group of women. Some of them have written, well, one has written for Quillette, another writes consistently for the right-wing media. And why not? I wouldn't run around outing people and saying, "Oh, you make your money from the Daily Mail," because guess what? As I wrote in a recent piece thanking women who had a foot in this race, it's because of the right-wing media that we've gotten anywhere, really. And as long as we're going to start to denigrate people for being on a political thread that we don't participate in, then we've already lost. I think it's really admirable, the kind of actions you've been taking, not only reaching across the aisle, but saying it really doesn't matter. Because when you're talking about women's rights, fundamentally, you're talking about human rights. I mean, I dare say none of these women would be making a similar argument if the argument, let's say, were stop bombing X country. Would they say, okay, you can bomb people who are on the right of center, just please don't bomb people on the, it would be ridiculous, and it would be regarded as an unserious argument. But somehow these women have gotten away with cherry picking who is worthy, which women are worthy of having their voices heard and defending. And I really like, when I listen to you, you're always talking about the rights of women. And that is, to me, even though you don't call yourself a feminist, that's what feminism is about. It's not about being the high priestess and purveyor of, are you a worthy feminist? I sometimes get hate mail. I got a really funny one, like, you're not even a radical feminist, fuck you. And I was thinking, okay, well, you're right, I'm not. I didn't answer her. But these are the kinds of things I'm also privy to, which I find amusing, because I've never once in my life said I was a radical feminist. And if you mistakenly think I am, you're right. I have no beef against these women either. But somehow I'm held to account for radical feminism because all over the internet, people have called me a TERF. Well, men are called TERFs too,
Yeah. Yeah. What I find really interesting about the left is you've got women in Iran who are being imprisoned for taking off their hijab or dancing or attending a football match during the last Olympic Games, and there's just a silence on it, and I just don't buy it. That you've got Jacinta Ardern, is that her name, down in New Zealand, when a mosque gets bombed, she put on a hijab, which I found quite an excruciating display of solidarity that then you have to dress like somebody in order to say that I stand with you. That seems peculiar. But I've never heard these people talk about women actually being imprisoned. And so when I think about Muslim women and I think about them as women and as humans, I'm thinking about those who are fighting to be free and express themselves how they want and uncover their hair throughout Iran, way before I'm thinking about the historical fact that Islam in the past and Muslims were far more progressive than we were living in whatever state we were in when they were building mosques and doing exceptional maths and biology and so on. I just think about 2020 and where they are there. But I don't think I'm necessarily right. I just try and see each woman as a woman before she's anything else, because I think once you start imposing cultural relativism on the human rights and dignity of somebody, you are just setting yourself up to fail, to see them as a human in their own right.
I mean, that's an interesting critique you made of Arden. I was thinking about this from the other side as well, because I've done a lot of work in the Muslim world, and in some countries like Morocco, you legally aren't allowed to go into a mosque unless you are Muslim. In other countries, you can access a mosque as long as a woman, you wear a headscarf and your arms aren't exposed, and, so forth. And I was thinking about how our political dialogue is happening in terms of looking like the other. I have to wonder if this is not part of the trans movement's ethos as well, where I have to wonder why men just can't say, instead of I am feeling like a woman, I still don't understand what that means. I don't think I ever will understand that, because it reads as fetish to me. Because I'm a woman, I've given birth to children, I have no idea what that really means to feel like a woman, because it sounds like a bad perfume commercial. But why can't men just say, I'm also feminine, or I like wearing dresses? Like, I wouldn't have a problem with men prancing around in dresses or stomping around in dresses or whatever they want to do in dresses. But the fact that we have to now look like the other to sympathize with them, like, are men dressing in dresses to really be women? Or can't we just say that it's a prime minister in a hijab, but why this, as you've asked, why does she feel the need to have to wear this? Why is that a sign of respect, as opposed to just saying, I really sympathize with your loss, and it is our loss too, because we are one nation, that type of rhetoric. Yeah. And where have we gone as a Western civilization, where sympathizing with can only be demonstrable at the point of parody or mimesis, replicating the other. And these raise, interesting questions, because until the 1970s, politically speaking at least, there was nothing wrong with recognizing difference. And then
weird,
you had,
isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I interviewed Glenn Lowry the other day, who spoke about, the historic representation of African Americans, and he was like, "Why are we talking about slavery still? We have become fixated on an era that's so far behind our culture. Even if some of the traces or remnants are still there, lightly so, however, why do we have to stick to, let's say, that particular historical moment? Why can men only see women as vestiture? Have you ever wondered, through all your activism, why I haven't ever come across one trans-identified man who says, I am deep down a woman, please pay me 40% less. Like, I would believe that this was a real thing, a medical condition, if I could see one case of that. But I don't.
Well, it's like we had BLM marches, didn't we? So for the historical, we had to pull down the statue of Colston, who lived in a time, who was, I think I read that he was also part of the abolition of slavery. So, and he also sort of gave money, and it wasn't just it wasn't schools built for white kids, it was schools built. But anyway, him aside, we had those protests, but at the same time, I don't remember a protest when, or even a big show of solidarity when the Vietnamese, the trailer load of Vietnamese people who died. So literal slaves, literal slavery, human trafficking. Mm-hmm. When we see it in front of us, there's no massive, great big public outpour. People aren't marching in the streets. People aren't marching in the streets about the Leeds managed zone of prostitutes. They'll take a knee for Black Lives Matter, for historical racism or slavery rather, and racism that, if you really ask most of those people, what do you think Black people face in the UK that white people don't? And I'm not saying that there aren't things. I'm just saying that most of the people that took a knee would have no idea what really any form of racism actually feels or looks like. I think they have a media-fed idea, but I don't think they could tangibly give you proper examples. And so there's this disconnect between what is really happening and our impotence in doing something about it, and what we pin actions on to make ourselves feel like we're doing something about something.
When I was living in France, I remember seeing the hatred by the French towards, say, Algerians far more than what I saw expressed towards people coming from Cameroon or Senegal. And one day I asked someone, I said, why is going on? Why is this happening? This is back in the 80s. And the person whom I asked said, well, racism generally takes place between the nearest neighbor. And I thought a lot about that, because the same is true for the States. When you see racism in the States, it's far more frequent to be against Mexicans, even more so than against African Americans. There's an event that happens once a year in New York called A Day Without Mexicans. The city shuts down completely because everyone knows this is the open secret. We would be nowhere without even quote unquote illegal immigrants. I have to put this all in quotes because there's a longer story and a larger discussion there. But I do think that it's much easier to go back 150 years and look at something that has minimal to no impact on today, as opposed to where were the protests about the bodies being trafficked to the UK in these horrific scenes of death? And why are so many trans supporters the same ones that say, fuck you, bitch, burn in a fire, etc.? I mean, this is happening. And so you see this utmost reverence for men in dresses and then hatred for women who say, but they're men in dresses. It's a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same as that. It's, I can't help feeling it's this transactional thing. So when it comes to money, for example, before you could get overdrafts and credit, then people, you would wait for stuff, right? So if you wanted a car, you'd have to save up. I mean, I've always been in an environment, in a culture, in a society where you could get credit. My parents, not so much. So that would be, if you wanted to borrow money, you'd have to go to and have a meeting with the bank manager, and it was all a bit more of an ordeal. And therefore, my parents never had an overdraft. They were, they didn't have any money. They didn't have an overdraft. So as we've progressed into everything being more immediate, and now you've got everything that's immediate. So you don't wait for 2 weeks to get, I promise that this is heading somewhere, Julian. You don't wait 2 weeks anymore to take your photo film, your camera film into the developer, and you wait. And then at the end of it, you might see your photo, and maybe 1 out of 40 is a good photo, and you're elated that 10 out of 40 don't have stickers on to tell you that you really can't take photos. And now we have instead filtered photos. So everything in your worldview comes through this special lens, whether it be what you see on your social media feed, how you see yourself. Everything has become really unreal and not tangible. And so maybe we revert back to historical struggles and fights because they're also not tangible, but they do make us feel better about ourselves. I mean, to
certain
digress.
historical fights, however, right? Because what we're seeing with transactivism is a focus primarily on men's rights. And I know people will say, but there are women who identify as transgender. Of course. But they're not the ones.
Nobody cares about them.
Yeah, no one cares about them because ironically, even the transactivists know what sex is, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking, here at CNN's page. I go to CNN for my onion moment now. And you see the top stories here, the British nurse charged with murder of 8 babies appears in court. Meanwhile, the same publication a few days ago had a piece on the, how old was she? 14-year-old bride in Pakistan. Isn't that called rape? But here we are, once again, there are specific rules being used and being enforced for us to call men she if they wear a dress and identify as. But meanwhile, an 8-year-old, a 14-year-old is married too. How on earth? Remember when the Boko Haram kidnapped all the girls from Nigeria and they were called they were called brides in one article? Yeah. This is what's happening. So there's only a certain recognition of historical discomfort. People are historically uncomfortable with slavery, but somehow misogyny is very comfy. It's like an old pair of slippers for many.
And it's so weird. It's like, I mean, when do you ever see anything about the Yemen on the news? You just don't. You don't see that country being blown to smithereens and people starving. We don't see that, and yet I have to hear people calling Donald Trump a genocidal maniac. I'm like, there's a literal genocide. Maybe it's politically not called a genocide, so forgive my ignorance, but you've literally got that country being bombed and people starving to death. You've literally got that. You've got all of the religious people, large swathes of Muslims, but basically anybody religious in China. You've got what they're doing in Hong Kong, all of these proper, for want of a better word, genocides going on. And yet people are calling Trump genocidal. And I'm like, he's the only one that didn't drop bombs. And someone said, oh, but he waged war on his own people. I was like, well, I don't know. Did he? Like, I don't want to defend Trump because I think he's a really odious, awful human being. And his business practices put many people out of business. And so I'm in no Trump corner. But I'm getting mighty annoyed by the fact that this election that's just happened was fought based on things that were kind of personality and not real, whereas I'm pretty sure he's done some terrible things as a president that he could have been fought on, but he wasn't. It's just so, all of it's mad.
This is where I'm very distrustful of the media. For all that staged, you're going to have a debate. I didn't see many hard questions being put to Biden about his role in these covert wars, supporting strategies in already ongoing wars, such as that of Saudi Arabia. Yemen is a human rights disaster, along with Syria, because of the travesty of what war has ravaged on that country, now starvation. And it seems the media has been complicit in dodging its responsibility to ask the question and to maybe raise the bar in what they should be asking. So Susan Rice, who was behind that strategy, by the way, along with Biden and Obama, very much looks to be a nominee in the future cabinet. Stay tuned there. But this is really insane that the war in Yemen has never been viewed during Trump's administration as a Trump war. Everyone in Yemen knows this was started by Obama and Biden. And I'm adding Biden's name to this simply because he was not only the vice president at the time, but he also had a role in certain kinds of political plans. It was Biden who went after Assange and Snowden. He was the one that wanted to ensure that journalists and whistleblowers were imprisoned and prosecuted. And this does not even strike a chord for Democrats. Again, when you get back on Facebook, go to my wall. I have some in real life friends who have serious problems with the fact that I'm criticizing Biden for his role in destroying democratic process.
But he started the criminal justice bill, right? That put loads and loads of black men in prison for just having like a little bit of weed. And he also did talk about the racial jungle when it was desegregation. I mean, I'm not saying that makes him worse than anybody, but I'm really surprised how when the left do something, and I use the left unwisely when talking about Democrats because I don't think they are, but when the left in America, who we shall call the Democrats, when they do something, people don't talk about it. I don't even understand where that comes from. It's so weird. It's a little bit like when people said that when women complained about Bill Cosby, that Bill Cosby was protected because the struggle against racism was more important than those women who had been victims of rape. So shaming one of the sort of the grandfathers of Black America and making him criminally accountable for those attacks on women was very bad for race relations in America. So it was, you know, it's that sort of thing, isn't it? That you have to protect your own above and beyond the essential morality that keeps everybody safe.
Absolutely, but there's this idea that we have to shut up, just like, you know, women are calling men she because they want to seem to be in solidarity with someone. But since when is lying for the sake of political acceptance solidarity, really? I mean, we've never really seen that. That's just a way of getting let out of the dungeon. And I don't think I could have voted for either man if I had to, because there were options. I would have chosen an independent candidate, but my worry was that Trump not win, because we knew already it was going to be between Biden and Trump. And my worry is always this, now that Biden's in office, you see these neoliberal Americans, and you're very correct in saying the Democrats are not left. There's nothing left about that party. It's only pseudo left in terms of, you know, smiley face and striking all the right chimes with talking about world poverty and war. But what we're seeing is Biden's cabinet and his decisions are already summing up to look much more right-wing than Trump. There's no doubt about this. I think a lot of reason why people like Joe Rogan are attracting more and more attention from media consumers is the fact that they are tired of the CNN fake exits from the basement after a fake COVID, you know, enclosure by the governor of New York's brother, the fake bantering of the brothers on CNN. I mean, CNN became almost a reality show for the Cuomo brothers.
I can't believe they're taking. So I've got a friend who lives in California. I was saying to him, is Chris Cuomo taken serious? Like, is he a serious news person? Because I watched him interview Ice Cube. I've never laughed. It's like a parody. He kept sort of saying bro, and he was interviewing him after Ice Cube that had come out and said about Trump, and he'd seen both political parties, and one had said we're going to do something and the other said talk to us later. And so he just reported that, and I think there was some investment going somewhere. I don't know the details. Anyway, Chris Cuomo obviously had attacked him over this and then had him on to have a discussion. It was so weird. But I understand that he is taken seriously.
Well, everyone, especially Black men and women in the U.S., are getting hell for saying anything that's critical of the Democrats, that say anything critical of Black Lives Matter. Look at Glenn Lowry and, you know, Adolph Reed. Glenn and I spoke last week about Adolph Reed's expulsion from the DSA. He was basically no platform from 2 talks in the spring in Philadelphia and New York. And I wrote a piece up on this. I won't say which editor, but one of the places I write for, the editor wrote me back and said they wouldn't run it because Reed was not no platform. Well, this is completely a fiction. He was absolutely platform. That's the definition of the word platform, and no deplatforming is when you're invited to speak and they say, no, you can't, because Reed's crime was, in an article in Common Dreams, he spoke to the neo-racism occurring within the left, where people are saying that now there is a genetic trait with no proof that allows Black Americans to somehow be infected by COVID at a higher rate. And this was going back to a very primitivist, 19th century styled racism. And he pointed this out. He was also pointing out that we need to have class analysis and get away from race as either a trope or an ontology, because race has been disproven since Darwin, and there's nothing else to say about except to put that to bed and put the nail in that coffin. Glenn Lowry interviewed John Shields, who's another anthropologist who's done work around the States. I recommend you watch his interview with him. And he basically showed how Trump was able to gain support of lifelong Democrats because of class issues. See, this is what the likes of the mean feminists who don't like us won't ever get to. That the real left is no longer being represented by the Democrats or the Tories. This is simply not the case. The real working class has been shifted to the Labor, from the Labor Party to the Conservatives, and in the States towards the Republicans. And this is the outcome of last week's election in the States. When he was talking about shithole countries, the thing is working class people aren't stupid. They also know that politics is a theater. They're not dumb. They know exactly what Trump is doing. They've been watching him on TV all these years. They know that he was the guy that said, and you're fired. They knew how to read him. It was the elite, the ones who get on and say, well, I wouldn't publish in that publication because they're not right. They're not left wing. Those are the ones who couldn't read what Trump voters were reading. And this is a huge disconnect. We're seeing it in terms of the racial makeup, quote unquote, racial makeup of those who voted for Trump. He had higher representation of minorities that any Republican candidate has seen in almost 80 years, if I'm not mistaken. 26% of Americans who voted for Trump were not white. Right men and women are talking about the dangers of having war hawks in a cabinet. I never thought I'd see this day.
Well, you've got the Executive Order 230 that Trump put through, which was to stop the control of social media giants or tech giants. That's Biden's going to overturn that straight away, and he's going to introduce the Equality Act, and he's going to do, like you say, he's more in bed with warmongers, and I don't understand why the idea, certainly in the United Kingdom, about what's going on in America, but the pro-life threat, if you can call it that people talk about, I don't know. I've read some stuff about Roe versus Wade that is not all as it seems. And so in a democracy, even though I am pro-choice and I think any country rolling back those rights would be foolish, I just don't know if those rights are more dangerous to lose than the right to define what a woman is. I just can't see it. I can't see how any country actually, so the stuff I really don't get about the pro-life Americans is often they don't believe in maternity pay, they don't believe in healthcare, they don't believe in a woman's right to choose. I find all that really crazy. But not being able to name what a woman is in law and not having any protections for women and girls, I think is such a more enormous, pernicious threat that would be far easier to overturn than the reproductive stuff. I I don't get how anyone sort of celebrates Biden knowing that he's going to do all of these other things. And that's not to say that they should have celebrated Trump either, although I do think any president who doesn't see China as a threat to the entire world is a moron.
Well, here we have another paradox as the Republican Party becomes, in terms of social issues, more progressive, like more in favor of same-sex marriage, or they're not the homophobic party of the 1980s and so forth. And some are not necessarily the majority. I haven't looked at the latest statistics, but many also are protective of women's rights to choose. It depends. Some Republicans in the States are fiscal conservative, not social conservative. So that distinction also has to be made. But what's interesting is, yes, this Section 230 that Trump wants to get removed is going to be a huge chunk of the battle for internet freedom, because the reason why this, it's a very long history as to why this was created, but it basically keeps the liability of what's posted outside of the tech giants' responsibility. But then one must question why tech giants are censoring their content then, because there was another law in the States that was brought through in the last year and a half, which made it it made this Section 230 have an exception, which had to do with child trafficking and sexual trafficking. So nothing about what you're saying or other feminists and women are saying that men are not women should be sanctioned. Yet oddly, big tech has taken on the mantle of becoming the overseer of what is and what is not acceptable speech. So it's a very strange law that exists just to pose a contradiction between the liability of interactive computer services. For instance, this does not affect the fact that the telephone company, British Telecom, will not be held responsible if you and I have a conversation and we say, but they're men, you will not be sanctioned, nor will the British Telecom, because part of human communications is that we're allowed to have our thoughts on various issues. And part of telecom giving the line for us to have a phone call means that they are just allowing us to have that line. They're not saying, oh, we approve of this message. How is it, though, that the internet became the space that suddenly AOL or Microsoft or whoever was hosting a certain site, or CNN, was then responsible for the content posted on them? Most of that law was struck down in the courts as an unconstitutional infringement on free speech, by the way, in 1996. And that was part of the Communications Decency Act. So Section 230 was enacted as a result of the Communications Decency Act being struck down as being unconstitutional. But that's the only part of it that remains, is Section 230. That's why it's called Section 230. But at the same time, Facebook, Twitter, Google are acting as the overlords of what you and I can say. So Trump is right to want that struck down, or that what takes its place? Do we want a Politburo that reads over our every post? Others are suggesting an internet-free zone, which is also ridiculous.
I was saying, I was talking to a friend about it, and they were sort of saying all the usual things about Trump. And I was like, right, let's say you're right about everything. Let's say he is just the worst person on the planet. He's a raging narcissist. He's a bully. He's a whatever he is. And let's say the alternative to that is this political elite where really the faces change, but the leadership doesn't. And the leader of the free world is just somebody who's controlled by these other enterprises and entities that we don't really get to elect. And Trump, all that Trump is nothing more than just an 8-year break. Wouldn't that be preferable than more of what we've had before? And that person was like, oh yes, but he's a racist. And I was like, well, and I think there was a guy on CNN who cried, a black guy who cried, said everywhere's safer today. My children are safer. And I just thought, is that tangible? So I had a look at the lowest income of black, white and average over the last, so since Obama was elected through to today. And it transpired that there was really no change in the bottom three tiers of white, average. So if you have 5 income groups, I looked at the bottom 3. And black to average and black to white had not changed over both of their presidencies. The only significant change was by 0.1, and that was in favour of Trump. So Trump had actually reduced the gap between average low income and black low income. That gap had slightly decreased during Trump's presidency, but nothing where you could say he's done these incredible things. Then I had a look at gun violence. Then I had a look at police gun, people murdered by police. And those statistics had not significantly changed in any way that you could suggest that Trump, during his presidency, had been worse for black Americans. It just doesn't bear out. And maybe I'm missing something, and I'm quite open to the idea that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I just wondered, is the media, the way the media has portrayed his presidency and his response to the media, who would claim they were responding to him, but I can't really see that besides his ridiculous tweets. I just wondered whether realistically this is a media war that people have been having. This is a media whipped up frenzy, which Candace Owens says always happens during an election, and that loads of this stuff really isn't true. It's just reported to be true.
This is where we are with media, and it seems the only way out of this media sinkhole that we seem to be stuck in is for us to start turning our attention to other media.
Well, yeah. I think you're right. I think the rise of, if you look at some of the big hitters on, who all happen to be men, which I can't tell you how infuriating I find it, that women were sort of kicked out of the left, right? Because men in the left want to call men women, and so we're kicked out of the left for not being left enough and not kowtowing to that ideology. But then actually outside of the left, women are also routinely ignored, and men expect to speak for us. I just think, I mean, I knew that there was misogyny, right? So, but I probably sat in the left and thought the misogyny was the sexist people that didn't think I could fix an engine, or knew how to drive a car around a racetrack, right? So that's what I thought sexism was, that there were men on the right who thought women were delicate flowers. But then those men still exist. And then you've got men on the left that think women don't even know what a woman is. And then women really, and this is why standing for women is about all women, really all women, because we are ignored by everybody. Even with some of my own things, which I can't go into, but there's been a couple of instances where men have decided they will speak about my stories for me, and will come and sort of help women by talking for women. And I don't know, Julian, if I didn't know that sexism was absolutely everywhere and unrelenting, I certainly do now.
The horrific statue of Mary Wollstonecraft that has been, debated all week. I looked at it, and at first I glanced at it in social media and thought it was an Onion piece, because I thought, surely not. I thought it was a joke. Then when I finally had time to read the story yesterday, I was a bit shocked. And I first thought was, how did this woman get the commission? And of course I saw she had OBE after her name. So
Yeah.
I asked people on Twitter, I said, aside from the fact that she has these letters after her name, what were the qualifications? And I sincerely doubt I'll get the answer to that question, because there's a lot of secrecy as to who gets published in the Guardian and who gets published.
It was so garbage. Dismembered bits of women that made up the bottom bit that looked like a cross between dog poo and tree stump. And Joe Bartosh wrote about it, but I read a piece in Spiked, who've done two pieces in a row actually that are quite, I really disagree with. One is Ellen Whelan defending Page 3 and saying that feminists are ridiculous for saying that we don't want it. And the other one was defending the Mary Wollstonecraft thing as if feminists were prudes, totally missing the point of the fact that feminism is quite opposed to objectification, and therefore a woman without her clothes on was just not the right, whatever your views are, if you're not a feminist, whatever your views are on nudity, it's not really up to you, because that woman was the supposed founder of feminism. So it was what feminism thinks of nudity that would have been far more important to what the average person thought of nudity. And that sculpt 143,000. I mean, I'm really thinking of commissioning a bronze woman, adult human female t-shirt. I haven't got 143 grand, but I'd love like a solid. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe that'll be my next project.